We have been playing the War Within Alpha over the past several days, and it's really fun. Hi, it's Llarold. My channel manager and I have leveled a bunch of characters on stream. We've gone through the first zone, the Isle of Dorn, 5 times now. We've also played through the 2 available dungeons, Cinderbrew Meadery and the Rookery. I'm going to talk about Windwalker and Brewmaster Monk, but first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, so that is basically what I did. I've played a lot of Monk. I leveled as both Windwalker and Brewmaster. I did leveling in the Isle of Dorn as both specs, swapping back and forth pretty freely throughout the process. And then I played both specs of Brewmaster in dungeons. In terms of changes to Monk, that is kind of the thing I want to start with because they're pretty extensive in the class tree. I mean, really, if I were to talk about all of this, it would take quite a while, but I think the best thing to emphasize here is just that there has been a pretty significant overhaul to the class tree. As you can see, the top talents have been moved around a little bit. I don't know why I'm spec'd into Soothing Mist. I think it was just by default. But there's a lot of utility in the tree, and there is a lot of the biggest criticism I had of Brewmaster, Windwalker, all Monk specs, really, in the Dragonflight talent tree revamp is that you would have to path through things that you didn't need, like Soothing Mist, to get things like a second charge of roll. That's no longer the case. Spearhand Strike, your interrupt, is very easy to reach now. You're not having to path all the way down to the side of the tree. When you get roll by default, it just has 2 charges now. The little passive that they give you for increasing the power of roll basically just makes it travel a teeny tiny bit further. You can pick up Celerity or Chi Torpedo, and you can have Chi Torpedo and have 2 charges of Chi Torpedo without having to spend talent points elsewhere. So they've really fixed a lot of the issues. They've also given a bit more utility. You can remove enrage effects by casting Paralysis on an enemy. There's a lot of cooldown reduction on talents like Paralysis and Leg Sweep, and just a lot of different crowd control interactions available to monks through their passive tree, through their talent tree, that weren't there before. Also, White Tiger statue only exists for Windwalker Monk, and as you can see, it is now a passive that just when you cast Zhuen, it automatically will cast a White Tiger statue as well. But for Brewmaster and Mistweaver, I haven't checked Mistweaver, but I'm assuming it's just gone. For Brewmaster, you now have the Black Ox statue there, and for Mistweaver, I would assume the Jade Serpent statue in the same place. Also, at the bottoms of the tree, there is this little talent here that makes it so that when you roll, you will automatically dash to a nearby enemy. And then this really interesting talent here, Lighter Than Air, that I'll show off. When you roll, you're able to double jump and it will cause you to surge forward. Very fun. So as you can see, a lot of the utility that you were kind of having to sacrifice either throughput talents in the tree to get utility or lose utility that you used to have just kind of by default, interrupt, roll with 2 charges on it, that sort of thing. That all has been fixed, and the class feels significantly better as a result. On the downside, the 2 auras, the increased avoidance aura that you got over on the right-hand side of the tree and the increased healing aura that you got over on the left-hand side of the tree, those are gone. So that is technically speaking a reduction in the class's utility, but frankly, they weren't things that made you go, oh, we gotta have a monk in our group to justify that awesome 8% healing increase. It was just something that, like, yes, you have to have a monk. You also have to have him for the physical damage debuff, even though it's really not that great. I think, frankly, they tuned around those effects existing, so I would rather just have them removed and then tune around them not being there and have all of our utility stuff in this left-hand tree, the class tree, be more focused on our experience of playing the class instead of being a buff bot. I think this is better. Now I want to talk about Windwalker changes because Windwalker has also gotten some really huge changes. It has gotten a massive reduction in the number of keybinds. As you can see, my keybinds are significantly less than they would be on live servers. Maybe I'll splice in a bit of live server keybinds to compare. But I mean, really, it is much easier to manage and play Windwalker now. And I'm just going to show off some of the talents that they have used to replace a lot of the overflow of keybinds that exist for Windwalker monks in Dragonflight. So starting right here at the top of the tree, Combat Wisdom replaces Expel Harm. It is a passive that makes it so that every 15 seconds, your next Tiger Palm will automatically cast Expel Harm and deal extra damage. So there's a benefit to it. It's not just that you're getting 2 GCDs for the price of 1, but then you're losing the ability to hit Expel Harm outside of combat and generate chi from that, and also like heal on demand. it is giving you more damage straight up, in addition to bundling a second GCD into your Tiger Palm. So this is basically all benefit. I think this is justifiable to lose that bit of control over your self-healing because of this. There are some other things as well. You'll notice that I have Chi Wave talented instead of Chi Burst, and that's because Chi Burst is still same old Chi Burst. You throw it out, it does some damage, 30-second cooldown, it has a cast time, but Chi Wave, as you can see, passive. Every 15 seconds, your next Rising Sun Kick, or Vivify, whatever, will automatically throw out a Chi Wave that deals a bunch of damage. You'll also see that Bone Dust Brew is just gone. Rushing Jadewind, you'll see I've spec'd into, it's a passive. When you cast Strike of the Windlord, it automatically casts. There are some other ways to get some automatic casts as well, but as you can see here, a lot of things that used to be on GCD skills have now been bundled into other effects and just are basically added in as free casts. So you aren't losing damage, you aren't losing value, you aren't losing utility, you're basically just losing the friction of keybinds, and I think that's genuinely a good thing, because Windwalker Monk has kind of felt like playing a flight simulator. There's just way too many keybinds. I don't have enough fingers to play Windwalker or Brewmaster recently, and this really seems like a great fix to it. The class really has a great flow now. It has really been fun in playing, to play Windwalker in leveling. I've really loved it, and I think it is a success already. Just this quickly, I think I would declare Windwalker a success. Obviously, it's not done. It's an alpha. Nothing is done yet. I mean, by definition, it is not done, but I do think they're going in the right direction. Now, as for Brewmaster changes, and I will swap over to Brewmaster to show off the differences in the class tree, but I'll just go ahead and spoil it. There aren't any. There are no tank changes yet across the board. Yeah, they're maintaining that retail WoW tradition of forgetting that tanks exist. It's the same old monk on the right-hand side of the tree. Class tree is the same. Too many keybinds still. I still like it. Still the same strengths and weaknesses as it always had. I think the difference here is I'm willing to say this isn't the plan, right? I think that what they're doing with Windwalker is kind of indicative of what they're going to be doing with Brewmaster as well. I think the plan most likely is probably to merge some skills together the same way that they have for Windwalker. I'm excited about that as a possibility. I certainly hope that is the plan, because I think it's been really successful for Windwalker, and I would just like to see more stuff merged together for Brewmaster. But ultimately, they haven't done anything yet with Brewmaster or any of the tanks, so it's all just speculation at this point. So now I want to talk about the hero specs and kind of how they have compared to each other, how I felt about them. So let's start with Shado-Pan, and that is the one that is shared between both Brewmaster and Windwalker, so I think it's the perfect starting point. The top talent here and the bottom talent are really the two that kind of inform what this is. So flurry charges are something you generate every time you do 10% of your max health, and then every time you spend 400 energy, you consume all of them and deal a bunch of damage based on each charge. So you can only have 10 at a time. And basically the way that this has worked out, both as Windwalker playing out in the world, Brewmaster out in the world, but also like Brewmaster in dungeons, and I would imagine Windwalker in any sort of dungeon or raid content as well, is as soon as you have consumed those flurry charges and you start charging it back up, you are basically instantly at 10 stacks. So this is a bit weird. You're always getting up to the maximum. You're basically always getting up to the maximum instantly, and then you have to spend 400 energy. So the way Monk works is that you regenerate 10 energy per second by default. That is increased by haste. So if you had 10% haste, which is kind of a lot for a monk, you would regenerate 10% more, so 11 per second. If you had, 30% haste, you'd generate 13 energy per second. The point is you'd be generating a lot, too much. So you don't actually want to stack haste, but I think that is sort of the incentive here, is like they're kind of trying to incentivize generating and spending more energy. But that's not how Monk works. It's not how they've ever worked all the way since Mists of Pandaria. So realistically, this means that for spending 400 energy, it's roughly every 40 seconds. Maybe it's more like 37, 38. More likely, it's a little bit over, more like every 41 seconds. But basically, roughly every 40 seconds, you will trigger this and then consume 10 flurry charges. Now, the bottom talent here, every 10 flurry strikes, that is consuming every single one of those flurry charges. So basically every time this procs, this bottom talent also procs. So it does damage, but more importantly, it gives you this buff for 20 seconds. So it's about a 40-second proc interval, so it's about a 50% uptime on the buff. And as you can see, the buff is quite strong. 30% increased crit damage, so crit is basically 30% more valuable. 25% increased effective mastery, 25% more value on mastery, dodge and crit increase your versatility increases your dodge and crit chance by 25%. So really, really big incentives to stack crit and versatility with this bonus, since versatility is double dipping into your crit chance, and then crit chance is double dipping into increased damage. And then also it makes your flurry strikes deal damage to enemies around you, but you're not going to be getting any extra flurry strikes in that 20 seconds. You're not going to consume 400 energy and then within the next 19 seconds consume another 400. So it doesn't really make sense. I assume the idea here is that it'll apply to all of the ones that are in that stack, but without advanced logs to look at, any sort of add-ons to look at to really go through that with a fine-tooth comb, it's sort of a little uncertain, kind of a weird design here. Now, there is one other talent here that I think is sort of interesting and worth noting, and that's this one right here, 15% more damage on all your energy spenders. This is really good for Brewmaster. That means 15% more keg smash damage. That's pretty good. For Windwalker, it's not as big of a deal. It's just Tiger Palm, 15% more Tiger Palm damage. It just isn't that much. And then every 50 energy spent reduces the cooldown of Storm, Earth, and Fire, Serenity, and Weapons of Order. So they've removed Serenity. That is something I kind of glossed over with Windwalker. We'll go back and look at that, but they've removed Serenity and kind of replaced it with not exactly an equal talent, but a related talent, Ordered Elements, which gives you chi cost reduction by performing your normal rotation while Storm, Earth, and Fire is active. And then it also makes it so that Storm, Earth, and Fire will reset your Rising Sun Kick and grant 2 chi. I swear I've seen this bonus before, at least the first half. I know I've seen this before. I can't remember where. I've gotten too old now, but I know I recognize this bonus. I would say just in general that I really, really liked a lot of the play style. I played around with a lot of different things as Windwalker. I thought they did some really interesting things with Teaching of the Monastery here, where your Tiger Palm will give you extra Blackout Kick hits, and your Blackout Kicks have a chance to reset Rising Sun Kick, and your Whirling Dragon Punch gives you a ton of stacks of that Teaching of the Monastery. And there's just a lot of other interesting stuff going on here. A lot of comboing back and forth that really works super well for Windwalker. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that Shado-Pan as a talent tree is, I don't know, a little underwhelming. It's basically like you get this big proc every 40 seconds, then you get this long buff for about half of the uptime in between. That's cool. This efficient training will basically shave about 20% of the cooldown off of Storm, Earth, and Fire and Weapons of Order. So if you're using a normal talent setup for Brewmaster Chi Surge, that'll take you down to 100 seconds baseline, and then 20% of that would be 20 seconds. So you'd be at an 80-second Weapons of Order cooldown as Brewmaster. That's pretty good. And we're looking at like a 90-second cooldown as Windwalker for Storm, Earth, and Fire. So 20% of that is 18 seconds. So like 70-something seconds. So yeah, you know, maybe with Spiritual Focus giving you more cooldown reduction as well, maybe a minute cooldown on Storm, Earth, and Fire. That's pretty good. If only Storm, Earth, and Fire wasn't like completely buggy and unreliable, that would be pretty good. Ultimately, I don't really think that this talent tree, the Shado-Pan talent tree, is really all that fun. You know, it's a big proc. It definitely felt like a lot of damage when I was using it. I was very pleased by that, but that's something that can be tuned around. Tuning is always the last thing they finalize. So just because something does a lot of damage doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. And it doesn't mean it's going to continue to deal a lot of damage. And I would say feel-wise, which is really what you want to evaluate early on in testing, it doesn't feel great. It feels like a big proc. 20 seconds of a buff, 20 seconds of nothing, big proc, 20 seconds of a buff, repeat, repeat, repeat. I like a lot of the side stuff. I like some of the interesting stuff going on other than that, like getting more Blackout Kick damage, getting, I don't know, armor pin, getting damage reduction when you dodge and parry. There's a lot of interesting utility here, a lot of just fun damage bonuses, but I think the main gameplay loop of Shado-Pan is a little underwhelming. All right, so now I want to look at the other Brewmaster Monk hero spec tree, because I think it's a lot stronger, a lot more interesting, and frankly, I think it's one of the strongest set of tank bonuses that we've seen in a while. And it is the Master of Harmony tree here, and the top talent is Aspect of Harmony. It causes you to store 20% of the damage you deal and 10% of the healing you do as a buff called Vitality. When you cast Celestial Brew, you are then able to basically expel that Vitality as 25% extra damage. And it does it as an 8-second dot, so it's not exactly burst, like it's not imbalanced for PvP, and it's not great for burst damage, but it works really well as a way of kind of threading the needle with, I think, the biggest thing that's always been a problem for me in the way that Blizzard likes to design offensive cooldowns for tanks. They'll make something that's a combination of an offensive and defensive cooldown, and so you have this incentive to hit it on cooldown, basically, for maximizing your damage. But then that means you're not holding it for when you need it defensively, so it's kind of a weird situation. If you have to hold something defensively, then you're losing damage. If you're spending it on cooldown for damage, then you're losing defensive value. Just a bit annoying. This really fixes that. If you sit on using Celestial Brew longer for more defensive value, you're just pulling up more damage to expel while that Celestial Brew is active. And this is really like kind of emphasized by this talent right here, Purified Spirit, which makes it so that when it ends, if you have any leftover vitality, it just gets released as damage at the end. Excellent design. Really, really love this. There's some other really good stuff in here too. Obviously this one right here, Celestial Brew, has one additional charge. Incredible. Being able to have 2 Celestial Brew charges is just amazing. And then the Capper, the final talent, when Aspect of Harmony deals damage, it spreads to nearby enemies, or it has a chance to. You know, this is really, really strong. I like both of these a lot. I really like this final line that just says you do 10% more damage or healing to people who have that debuff on them, or buff on them if it's the Mistweaver healing version of Master of Harmony. Like, I really, really like this talent tree a lot. I think it's really, really effective. The problem with it is it's not yet implemented on a lot of these powerful bonuses. Endless Draft, not yet implemented. Resonance, not yet implemented. So that's, you know, it's hard to evaluate something. Balanced Stratagem, not yet implemented. It's hard to evaluate something in a comparison between this and Shado-Pan when about half of the talents or a third of the talents just aren't in yet. Another one that's not yet implemented. Ultimately, I think this one is a lot better on paper. I think this one will wind up being stronger. I certainly find it more interesting, and I like it a lot more conceptually, but it's incomplete. It's really kind of hard to truly evaluate it with an honest opinion based on experience. I did still play it. I liked what I saw, but it definitely wasn't doing as much damage as Shado-Pan, I think in large part because it's not fully in yet. All right, the third and final hero spec tree, the one for, I guess, Windwalker and Mistweaver, is Conduit of the Celestials. And this was the surprise success. I really like it. I didn't think I was going to. It basically is just an on-use cooldown and then a bunch of random procs, and I thought that seemed kind of bad initially coming into the alpha, but it's actually really, really good. The on-use cooldown really, really looked like a big problem. This right here, Celestial Conduit, it is a multiple second channel that deals a lot of damage. It is a 1.5 minute cooldown. You're able to move while you're channeling it, but you're not able to actually do anything. Now I'm near some PvP training dummies. I don't know how well this is going to work on them, but it does a ton of damage. Just to show it off, it looks like this. And yeah, it's not doing a lot of damage on the training dummies here, but as you can see, it summons all the Celestials. They do some stuff, some extra procs. They give you all kinds of stuff. Zwin will show up and do a little bit of damage. Nisao will show up and do some more damage. Chi-Ji will run around and hit a bunch of enemies. And Yu'lon is around here somewhere, and she shows up and gives you a bunch of cooldown reduction on Rising Sun Kick, Fist of Fury, Strike of the Windlord, and Whirling Dragon Punch. Basically everything a monk likes. Now, aside from that damage maybe not being right on the training dummies, the PvP training dummies, it does about 1.4 million damage at level 73 with very bad gear here. So, like, I was absolutely smoking fools out in the world with this cooldown. And, I really thought, like, adding an extra on-global cooldown and just an extra keybind into Windwalker Monk, that seemed like a really bad idea, but then they redesigned Windwalker, and now it actually has a super small list of keybinds, so fitting in an extra skill is totally easy. Honestly, having the extra keybind with Conduit of the Celestials felt better than not having it with Shado-Pan. It does a lot of damage too. I was really, really pleased with it. I don't really think it synergizes with the rest of the kit exactly. It feels a little bit out of place, like you're not popping Storm, Earth, and Fire and then popping Celestial Conduit. You want to get Celestial Conduit in before that, or, basically have it overlap with like trinkets and a lot of damage buffs and potion, that sort of thing, but you're not wanting to like layer that with your Storm, Earth, and Fire. Basically the opposite. You're wanting to use Celestial Conduit to then lead into your Storm, Earth, and Fire. But the cooldown reduction from Heart of the Jade Serpent, the Yu'lon cooldown reduction, was very, very good. And yeah, I just really, really enjoyed playing with this, even though it is kind of just a bunch of random procs and an on-use cooldown. It actually was very, very successful. So in terms of my closing thoughts here, I think Shado-Pan looks like it's intended to be the Mythic Plus hero spec for both Windwalker and Brewmaster Monk. It has cycles of mostly passive damage. It's not completely passive. You are actually having to do stuff, consume energy in order for it to proc, but it's basically a burst window every 40 seconds, 20 seconds of that really, really strong buff, and then 20 seconds of total downtime. The cooldown reduction bonus that it gives you for Weapons of Order and Storm, Earth, and Fire is decent. It isn't bad, but it just isn't really all that exciting of a hero talent tree. I think thematically it doesn't really work for me either. I don't really get what's Shado-Pan about this damage proc exactly. It is a controllable damage proc, but it's tied to spending energy and doing damage, so it's basically automated. It tries to reward you for having more haste, but that just doesn't really work at all for Monk. It's weird, not great. Master of Harmony and Conduit of the Celestials both seem like they're more raid focused, built around cooldowns. They are a lot more interesting to me as well, and honestly I think as they're currently designed, I could see both of them being better in all situations. The design of Conduit of the Celestials is similar to Shado-Pan. There are still a lot of random procs, but the on-use cooldown is the core component of the spec, and it fits really well into burst damage windows. It's just a more interesting spec than Shado-Pan. Master of Harmony has a really, really smart design for letting tanks combine damage and defense in a way that doesn't punish one or the other, and I love that. I want to like it more in Mythic Plus too, but the reliable 20-second buff of Shado-Pan is really good, at least right now, while Master of Harmony is unfinished. It's just not comparable. I think that getting a 20% damage multiplier on all of your damage just by using Celestial Brew and then getting that explosion at the end, and also 10% more damage on all the enemies that are debuffed with that kind of has like a self-sustaining, like basically a positive feedback loop where you're then adding more damage into the vitality pool to then consume later, and it just sounds really, really good. Ultimately, I could see that being better 100% of the time. I would not mind that. Having 2 Celestial Brews is really nice. Having Celestial Brew do a bunch of damage is also really nice. It's just a much more interesting tree than the 40-second window damage proc tree. So that is Monk so far in the War Within Alpha. This is just the very first look from the very first week, so we're nowhere close to done yet. The fact that tanks are unchanged doesn't mean anything to me at all, and the Windwalker redesign is really everything I could have possibly wanted for both Windwalker and Brewmaster, so I am hopeful that the Brewmaster will be something close to the Windwalker one. If it is, I think they're going to be in amazing shape. I like it a lot right now, and I think that Windwalker is actually going to be really popular in the next expansion if the current redesign holds. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.